All right, so this is Joey, and I have UVA Cavaliers going all the way.
I guess when this episode is aired, we'll pretty much know who the final two teams are. So right now, I guess you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I may sound like I'm the man.
Maybe.
At the point where people are listening, if UVA is in the final, I think actually this episode may come out the day of the finals.
Really?
So watch. How killer will that be, man?
That would be pretty cool.
How killer will that be? All right. Can you do your part now?
Sure. Yeah, okay. So this is the pastor's older brother, and I have North Carolina going all the way.
Yeah. ACC. And this is the pastor with no answers. All right, so for the kick of it, I actually have an all ACC Final Four, and I have Duke and North Carolina in the finals. Dude,
Duke?
How epic would it be if those two teams ever were in the finals
That
together,
would be pretty
man?
cool, yeah. So is that possible for them to be in the finals together? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so I was thinking about this the other day. Do you remember how all right, so starting in 1993, you and I no longer lived in the same house, and so we had to keep in touch by other means. We've been through seasons where I think we kind of scheduled times to talk on the phone. We've been through times where we just tried to, figure it out and all that stuff. Now, you and I are so busy, but we have squeezed into our schedule every other week to record these podcasts.
Yes.
And so this is our catch-up time.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to vow to you that if there's ever something that I really need to talk to you about, like something super heartfelt, something that I'm going through a lot of pain, and I haven't been able to talk to you about it leading up to the podcast, I'm just going to have to tell you on the podcast. So it'll be the most unique talk time that we'll ever have for everybody here. Do you remember my depressing phone calls I used to give to you?
Yeah, I definitely do. We're talking what, like middle to the end of your college years and then post-college?
Yeah, college years, calling you and just totally a mess.
I definitely remember that.
Were you
it was tough because, I wasn't there to like hang out with you. I was like 2.5 hours away, so it was a little bit frustrating just being over the phone. Because think about it, the first 18 years of my life, you and I, first I guess 16 years, you and I were in the same house together. Yeah. And so I could just go to your room, we could hang out and go somewhere. But when you're in college, you're separated, the phone doesn't really cut it so well. So it was frustrating for me, man, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so I don't know if I've told you this before, but there was a time when I was feeling really depressed, and I told myself I'm not talking to anybody about this. I'm not going to try to describe my feelings. I'm just going to be by my lonesome, me and God sort of thing.
And this is in college, or this is after college?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is college, probably sophomore year.
Okay.
And then you called just out of the blue. And it was nice to like hear your voice and like a sense of comfort hearing my big brother, but I still was determined. I'm not talking to Jared about this either, but you smelled BS all over my front, and you started to ask, specific questions that I either had to lie to you,
wow,
or basically come clean.
Yeah. And
for me, it was kind of a spiritual lesson for me as far as just the need for community is concerned, and just God was just like, oh, so you chose that you were going to do this by yourself, and I choose that I'm going to have your brother call. So take that. Boom.
Was it a fruitful conversation for you?
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I don't know if you knew this or not, but if not, then I've got a surprise for you. You know who Matt interviewed on Break It Down a few weeks ago?
No.
Mark Trambino.
Really? He's the guy that I think he produced, one of Knapsack's albums that I like so much. I'm pretty sure.
Knapsack?
Jimmy Eat World?
Inserenating? Clarity?
Well, he did Inserenating?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So it is really a neat interview. And you know that he opened a donut shop now in Southern California.
Wow.
So he's not doing the producing thing right now. He's doing donuts. But let me ask you this. So they're talking about Jimmy Eat World and, just Clarity and, just how epic of an album that is. And so I immediately unplugged from the podcast. I was just like, I'm going to listen to the rest of this later. I've got to listen to some of that old school Jimmy Eat World. So I actually put in the EP that came out before Clarity. And I
have that on vinyl, by the way.
What's
I have
that?
that on vinyl.
The EP?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because I bought it. I think I bought it for you initially, and then you gave it back to me.
The vinyl?
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I remember you actually also bought that EP. It was Christmas of '98, and I was super down. And so you went into Manifest, which is now Monster Music. You went in there and basically came out, kind of said, "Hey, I hope this cheers you up" or something. But so I was listening to that. And I was in the car by myself, and I was listening to that Roller Queen song. And dude, it took me back in such an extreme way. I was pretty much moved to tears, and I thought to myself, there are certain albums that I don't think I have the capacity to listen to casually. Now, obviously, with music, there, I guess you could make a case for there being no such thing as a casual listen to music just in general, considering they're pieces of art. But there are albums that I can't just listen to and be like, oh yeah, those are. And so I would say Clarity, including that EP, Jejune, my sister-in-law's friend, was over. We were playing cards, and we were talking about Jejune, and I was like, well, let me let you hear it. And I was so distracted. Like, I was sitting there trying to play my hand, and I was just staring out into space because it just took me back.
Yeah.
And then I would say Hard to Find a Friend. I can't listen to that just casually. It just, those albums are just too moving. Do you have any CDs that are like that to you?
See, I think for me, it would be stuff from high school. So a lot of the blonde vinyl stuff, like Breakfast with Amy, what's the guy's name? Steve Austin, or John Austin and the Embarrassing Young, I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fluffy.
Galactic Cowboys.
That's not blonde vinyl, but yeah, same era.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say those. Like, so I would say my junior year and senior year in high school, a lot of those blonde vinyl things, including, and then also the Galactic Cowboys, are I can't listen to it casually.
Yeah.
So
the
good news is, though, I don't think anything that I absolutely love musically was ever ruined for me. Like some of your albums were ruined for you. Like, yeah. So I think I've dodged that bullet so far.
Yeah, so. That's funny. All right, well, we're going to be joining here with our two guests and talking about the future of America, kind of focusing a little bit on the economy and just the crazy burst of technology in what? Just quickly enhancing? Well, how would you describe that? Just
what, technology as?
Yeah, just how it's progressing just at exponential speeds.
Yeah, and even the whole transhumanism. That whole movement's weird too. So
yeah, for sure. So yeah. All right, so we are joined here with two familiar voices, a couple of guys that we've had here with us in the last few weeks or so. And we're going to be talking about the future of America and, touch on some things related to that. And we're here with Ted Demas and Jack Hoy. Two Jack Hoys. This is I can call you the older one, right? Do you prefer greater?
The elder.
Actually, I don't.
The elder. All right, so let's just jump right in this thing. I'm gonna, Jared, don't have your immediate irritated reaction to this. It's not yes or no questions, and you can explain. But there are 5 questions. I'd rather not go too deep into them initially, but I just kind of want to get things started in our heads and let our listeners kind of hear where each of us are coming from and see where this conversation is going. So first question is, will the USA soon, and when I say soon, we're talking 25 years, so will USA soon not be the superpower of the world? Ted?
This isn't a yes or no question?
Yeah, I mean, it's yes or no, but it's not like you can't give a quick explanation if you want.
25 years, I don't think so.
You don't think so, Jack?
I would say you can't know, and I would observe that if you had asked that question in 1976, people would have said no.
Uh-huh. All right. Jared?
Are you saying the superpower or just a superpower?
Yeah, just basically what we all grew up with. We feel a little secure living in America because we know if somebody messes with us, they're not going to get away with it. Nobody's going to come on our, grounds and take over.
I'd say no.
You know what I'm saying? You would say no? So you're saying we will not be the superpower in 25 years?
Yes.
Okay. And
I will say we will not be the superpower. I don't know about a superpower.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to agree with that statement.
Who would be another superpower?
China?
China,
Yeah.
Russia.
Not Russia. Russia's dying. They have the highest mortality rate in the world. Their population is shrinking unbelievably fast. They're a mess.
Gotcha. And I'll say, almost not knowing really what I'm talking about, just being kind of more of a skeptic, pessimist, I would say no. And I can't really tell you why, other than just seeing kind of how we are with foreign affairs and downgrading our military and all that.
So I'll take the contrary stance. And again, same things in the 1970s. You had an appalling economic situation.
Yeah.
You had, the military was really struggling. I mean, in a way that, like, we had you remember the Iran hostage situation in 1980, and basically the helicopters all broke down on the way there. I mean, it was appalling.
Yeah.
And, the thing that makes me say that it's not inevitable either way is that it really does hinge greatly on who your leader is.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Carter was a fine man who couldn't lead his way out of a paper bag. And,
Jack, what do you think about Jimmy Carter? He is nice. He's a nice guy.
Nice man. Yeah. Yeah. And people were asking the kinds of questions like, does it even matter who's president? This job is obviously impossible anymore. And there's nothing, there was a sense of tremendous hopelessness. And,
Yeah.
I don't want to paint Reagan as a savior. I mean, really, but it really was a turnaround.
Yeah.
And not because he did amazing things. It was like he just quit doing stupid things.
Yeah.
And so that's part of my thing is a lot of this just isn't that hard.
Yeah.
We have enormous advantages that we can extend for a long period of time. And the fact that we've been doing some enormous, very stupid things in my mind doesn't mean that we are doomed to keep doing them.
Gotcha.
A lot of people would probably argue that Reagan didn't do stupid things.
He didn't. No, that's my point is that he didn't. Oh, yeah,
Well,
but they would argue that he did.
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners are probably ripping their hair out saying
Well,
the
I
exact
mean,
opposite.
well, it depends. It depends what your criteria are.
Right.
If you want to argue that justice did not advance during that time, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made either way there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, did he restore the U.S. to a point of preeminence? Yes, I think you'd have to say he did, both economically and in terms of political influence.
All right. Second question, are we headed towards another economic collapse in the next 5 years? And I would say at the level of the 1930s, or was it 2007, 2008? So somewhere in that ballpark, are we headed there within 5 years? Jack?
No.
So we're pulling out of this, and we're
No, I don't know that we're pulling out, but what I would just say is one of the reasons that the last recession was so bad was that it had been so long since there had been a bad one.
yeah.
And kind of what the strategy seems now to be is like avoid a recession at all cost. So what you do is you just, like my analogy is you get a patient with food poisoning and you treat the symptoms. What they need to do is puke, but
Yeah.
you won't let them puke. You want them to feel better. So they keep getting sicker and sicker while they still feel decent. And ultimately, there's a price to be paid for
Yeah.
that. So my kind of point is, I think the likelihood of another bad downturn, it's going to happen, but I don't think it's that close.
Yeah. Ted, what do you think?
I think it depends. It hinges on who our leaders are in the next 4 to 5 years and what decisions we make. Globally, I think there's a pretty high chance of it. But I also read something that not too long ago that said the 2008 crash was in raw numbers, or maybe not raw numbers, but relative to the Great Depression, was actually worse. Maybe different in that we have much more infrastructure now, and we didn't feel the same physical effects as the country
Well,
did.
unemployment hit 25% in the Great Depression, and it hit 10% this last time.
Wow.
Is that going on the same government
Measures.
measures?
Yeah. There are a couple measures, I can't remember what they were, that said that this one was worse than the Great Depression. But I think in terms of human cost, I think it'd be hard to argue
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I was reading a book that my son He's in K5. He brought back from the book fair, and it was just talking about how money over time, it loses its value.
Isn't that called
Hey,
inflation?
All right, Jared, what do you think? Economic collapse?
Yeah,
in the next 5
I don't
years?
know. Like, I guess for me, this is
You're an econ major, man.
Yeah,
so
I haven't
you
I
better
haven't
know
even
your
studied that
stuff.
in like 25 years though. So I liked it then. I liked art history then. I don't do anything with them now. But to me,
Thanks for wasting mom and dad's money, man.
well, I'm a well-rounded person. Like it was a liberal arts school, so I learned a lot about a lot of things. Anyway, to me, it just seems preposterous. The way we're spending money, the massive deficits that we have, the massive debt that we have, and it seems like the value of the dollar is just kind of, it's nebulous. I mean, I guess you can call it the petrodollar because it's linked to oil, but it's not really backed on anything, or I guess linked to anything tangible. So when you put all those factors together, to me, it seems pretty scary, but that could be total ignorance on my part. It just seems scary.
All right. How likely is a one world economy in the next 25 years, Jared?
100%.
Whoa.
Please tell me what that term means.
So just basically where we all have the same currency, we all are basically connected worldwide.
We all have the same currency,
Right.
meaning we've all got, like, there's a common government?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basically.
And Jared, you say 100%.
Yeah.
Jack just for the first time in the history of me and Jack's relationship, he just mouthed WTF.
Nice. All right. Well deserved, for sure.
I'm just kidding. What about you, Ted?
I was initially going to say that I think we're already there until you defined it a little bit better. But, I mean, we're definitely a global economy now, and I don't think we're that far off from having global mergers of government. But I don't think we're going to be 100% one world government in 25 years.
Yeah.
So, Jared,
at least I hope not.
Yeah, Jared, would you say that would be with the Antichrist?
I mean, I guess so. I maybe, and I see where Ted's coming from. I mean, I think that the majority of the Earth's population would be under one government, but I do think you'll have, certain pockets here and there, maybe not so much. I think there'll be some resistance to that idea, but I do think we're heading in that direction. And 25 years sounds pretty far off to me. So, a long way off. So I do think that by that time we will be under a one world government, and sure, probably linked to an Antichrist.
See, I think the opposite. Like, the one experiment with that is the European Union, and it's coming apart. Who's going to give up power? I mean, for there to be one world government, most of the people now in power have to give it up, and I don't see any volunteers lining up. And I also don't see,
Trump is. Donald Trump is.
He gets along so well with everyone. Yeah.
But I think, too, that as listeners to the show, I'm very conspiratorial minded, and I do think, no, I really do. I do buy into the whole idea of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, people behind the scenes pulling strings, and to me, that's not that far-fetched, and those are the guys who ultimately have the power.
I agree. I agree with that.
Jared is in his car right now, and he is trying to discover the end of the earth because the daggum thing is flat.
I'm going to pierce that dome.
Like
hanging out with B.O.B.
My wife was going on a rant about, the conspiracies of the oil companies when gas was $3 a gallon. And, I don't hear her talking about that now that it's $1.50.
Right.
Like, it's just weird how the conspiracy theory thing works.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. If we get the right guy in the Oval Office, could things turn around significantly right away? Jack?
Quickly, because there are some easy things that could be done quickly.
Even if we get one guy in the Oval Office with the majority of Congress on the other side, you think things could happen?
Who knows? Like you said, right guy. I mean, that's a pretty high bar.
Right.
But, could things change with the right leader? Well, of course. I think history shows that.
Right.
I mean, the problem is that you tend to get the leader you deserve, and that would be a little hard to make the case we're going to get a great leader out of this particular election.
Yeah. Ted?
What was the question again?
just basically, how much of an impact does the right guy in the Oval Office have? Like, if the right guy's there, can things turn
Jack
big
said
time?
it all.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add.
How about you, Jared?
I don't see it. I think there's too much gridlock, too much ideology, so much crap in politics. I'm pretty turned off by the whole thing. I don't see much change happening one way or the other. So no.
I agree with that, but you're talking from a social perspective. I think from a federal government perspective, that a lot can change really relatively quickly. Socially, I don't think anything is going to change for a while.
Yeah, I think if everyone's on the same page, yes. But is that going to happen? I don't see it happening.
Yeah,
part of it depends on. I mean, one of the imponderables is that what generally causes things like this to change. It's usually a crisis.
Yeah.
So do people tend to change their perspective on what's important when there's a crisis? I mean, a lot of times that's the deal. It's an external event, and those are the things, of course, you can't predict.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, of course, you could also say you have the wrong leader there and you have a crisis. It could go completely the other direction. And that's true.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I guess I don't see a whole lot of difference. I'm not trying to belittle myself, but you three guys are not only more aware of the ins and outs of politics and government stuff, and it's not as much of an interest, but just from a casual observation, I don't see a huge difference of how things were from Clinton to Bush to Obama. It just kind of it just seems like things have, I don't know, just been somewhat bad, but it hasn't really affected me much either. So I don't know. All right, we'll get back to these a little more in depth. Last one, kind of going off a little bit to another realm of thinking. How likely, from a percentage standpoint, that we have a nuclear war in the next decade? Jared?
I don't think that's very likely, because I think the whole idea of assured mutual destruction has scared off the superpowers, although I do think that a dirty bomb is highly likely. So just not a global nuclear holocaust. I don't see that happening.
Dirty bomb, meaning?
Like a small suitcase bomb that has nuclear radiation attached to it or whatever in a city like New York City. I think that's pretty likely, but in terms of a global nuclear thing, no, I don't see that happening.
How about you, Jack?
I think, Jared, I would agree. I think that with how many lunatics out there have or are close to having nuclear weapons, you got to think that the likelihood that there's going to be a nuclear bomb used at some point in the next 20 years is got to be reasonably high.
Yeah.
But I agree. I don't see a nuclear war.
Yeah.
What I see is a act of terrorism that kind of outstrips anything that's ever happened.
Yeah. Gosh, that's crazy. What about you, Ted?
Yeah, I'm in the exact same spot. Although North Korea is getting pretty serious with their nukes lately. They keep saying in the news that they want to, or they have the ability to nuke New York City.
Wow.
They
say it, but
but I mean again,
it could or it could not be true.
Again, I just feel like they're more in the and if they did, then they would get shut down, but not before they could get one off. I'm sure.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm saying. I don't.
What do you think the likelihood of Iran getting a bomb in the next 15 years?
100%.
Yeah, I agree there.
I agree there.
And so when you say getting a bomb, how significant of checks and balances are in there as far as us knowing about it and us basically saying if you use it in a certain way?
Well, when they get one, they'll announce it, so I think we'll know pretty soon.
Why would they announce it?
Because they want everybody to know.
Okay.
Especially Israel.
Especially Israel. That's exactly right.
What are the chances that Israel will attack before Iran has a chance to get it?
I think high.
I guess what I would say is a part of that depends on who's in the White House. Mm-hmm. Would they do it with Obama in the White House? I would say not, because they don't look at him as their
they don't have any
ally.
support.
Yeah.
All right, so Jack, so with all this stuff that we're talking about, nuclear bombs and Israel attacking Iran and all that, do you see this age that we are living in, the age in which your grandkids, our kids will live the majority of their life in? Do you see it as significantly more of a tumultuous time to live in than prior years because of the advancement of technology and the capacity to destroy civilizations with all that stuff. Like, do you see this as, man, this is unfortunate that people, that
what I would say is that every age has the possibility of that, and it's never inevitable.
yeah.
So what I would say, like if you said, what was the most horrific period for human beings to live through, you could argue World War II.
Yeah.
In terms of mass destruction, mass death, I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, and we look back, we know who won now, but at the beginning, it wasn't apparent who was going to win.
Wow.
And talk about living in fear.
Yeah.
And, so, I don't look at this as a, wow, this is just really terrible. And there's always that risk.
Yeah.
But, it's part of the deal and you got the church and you've got, so there's no reason to give up either. There's no reason to assume that the worst will happen.
Right.
I wish I had that perspective. I'm not as calm and collected normally.
Well, it's funny. Part of my perspective is historical, and I was talking to you guys a little bit about that. So, I was talking to a guy this afternoon saying, has there ever been an election like this where just the craziness? And, and I was thinking about it after I left, and what I would say is yes, in the 1820s. So in 1824, you had Andrew Jackson running for president. Now, every president up to that point had either been a Boston lawyer or a Virginia planter, and he was a nut job.
Yeah.
He exterminated Indian tribes. He was a brutal, vicious. He murdered people. He was in duels where he killed people. He was in a gunfight where like 8 people died in the streets of Nashville. He was a nutcase.
Yeah.
He was Bernie Sanders-like too, in the sense that he blamed everything on the banks. and his big thing was when he became president, he was going to shut down what was then the equivalent of the Federal Reserve, which
So he was like Hitler,
the Bank of
and
the United States.
Bernie Sanders, kind of.
A little bit. And anyway, so election of 1824, he was the leading vote getter, but he didn't get a majority. So it went into the House of Representatives, and they were determined that it was anybody but Andrew Jackson. So John Quincy Adams became president, even though he finished last.
Wow.
Gee.
Yeah. So the Jackson, you can imagine the outrage and the rigged system and the how corrupt is this? And so he ran again in 1828, won, and shut the Federal Reserve down, which started the mother of all bank panics. But interestingly, he's viewed as certainly a very consequential president, probably a pretty evil guy, but a guy who, on balance, you'd say his record wasn't too bad. He had some accomplishments as well. So it's just interesting. It's just, was it really worse? Is this election really worse than that one? I don't, I think you can make an argument.
I think there's a lot of historical ignorance, so people just always look at the current situation and say it's never been worse than it's been before.
And I think for me too, it's not necessarily who's running the whole political thing. For me, it's the context within which this election is taking place, and that is a context where technology is growing so tremendously, genetic manipulation is growing. So there's these threats that are looming that we don't really even know exist right now, and that's what scares me. And that's why I think the world will rapidly change as technology advances so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine if what happened in the 1820s happened today with the immediate dissemination of information and people. There
would be rioting for sure.
Right, there would be rioting in the streets. And there may be rioting in the streets in 6 months from now,
What's funny, like another example, when I was 13 in 1969 when the draft riots were happening, and I remember my parents just talking about, like, after the thing at Kent State where 4 students were shot, and just how awful this was. And I used to read a lot of history as a kid. I'd read about the draft riots in New York during the Civil War. When they first instituted the draft, hundreds of people were killed.
Yeah.
Half the city was burned down.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not trying to argue that it can't be bad. I'm just saying, it's been bad before.
Yeah.
And it can be bad again, but nothing is inevitable either way.
Yeah.
And
so what would it mean for regular folks, civilians in America, for America not to be the superpower? Because, and I guess what I mean by superpower is that we have a realm of confidence that, outside of 9/11 really is just kind of like we're all safe, like we're okay. No one's going to be able, they may attack our country, surprise attack us like Pearl Harbor and stuff, but at some point we're going to figure this out. We're going to win, especially, and I would say probably, would you say it's accurate that post World War II was when we really built that confidence of we're good, like we're the powerful country?
Actually, what I would say is that really accelerated after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Because after World War II, we were the dominant power, but we didn't actually realize how dominant we were because the Soviet Union was incredibly well armed, and they took over all of Eastern Europe, so they had a population within the Soviet bloc that far exceeded ours.
Yeah.
And Joey, I would argue too that I think the nature of the threat has changed. I mean, during the Cold War it was the Soviets, but now it's terrorism.
Yeah.
And I think that threat and that fear is just as real. So I would argue that we already are in the same position as having, a shared superpower, and that's terrorism. We're spending so much money fighting wars in the Middle East. They've ramped up surveillance like crazy. So I think a lot of people do live in fear. And I think if you turn on Fox News, it's constantly terrorism this, terrorism that. So I do think there is that fear element that's just as tangible today as it was 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if you said what are some of the risks on the downside, it's that kind of thing. I think that's well said, Jared, is, people won't live in fear. And would people give up democracy if the alternative was they didn't have to be afraid? Most people would.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how Hitler came to power.
Ah.
So I do think that there is that danger. And again, why are people flocking to Trump? Because they think he's a strong guy who's going to do whatever he says he's going to do, though it seems pretty incoherent to me. But
yeah, well, let me ask that as far as what do you got in there? There's no way for this conversation not to ruffle feathers. I would encourage our listeners not to see this as a political party thing, but more of a just Donald Trump thing. So obviously he is a very unique candidate. Probably, maybe Jack made a case for him being the most unique since old Hickory. So, what are the foreseeable crazy things that could happen under a Trump presidency? I mean, do you guys think that we would just immediately be a hated country that just people are disgusted with? Is he going to say things that just put a horrible taste in people's mouths? What do y'all, or do you see Trump as actually getting some stuff done as far from an economic standpoint? What are y'all's thoughts on President Donald Trump?
I'm
Jack,
hopeful that he would get some stuff done. I can't say that I'm a supporter of his, but at the same time, I understand where his supporters are coming from.
I do too, frankly.
The palpable anger with leadership in our government is just overpowering, and I feel it myself. And but that being said, I think Donald Trump, as brash as he comes off and as misogynistic and whatever other adjective you want to use to describe him, he's very calculated, and I think he's very smart about the way he's run his campaign. He knows that people are angry, and he's tapped into that extremely well, and he's used the media to do all of his advertisement for him. So while he is good at saying off-the-wall things, I think he's also good about thinking through most of what he's saying before saying and doing before he does it.
Yeah.
So I don't think we would be in for an immediate nuclear war because Donald Trump goes to, Putin or China and says whatever,
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think that you're right. He's tapping into this anger. So right now his primary audience is the American people. But if he is elected, I'm hopeful that he'll tone down that rhetoric when he's, doing diplomatic, trips to Russia or whatever. Because you said he is calculated. He's definitely a smart guy. So I'm hopefully this rhetoric is just to rally support in America, and then once the election is done, he'll start mellowing out a little bit, at least in the way he says things.
It actually seems to me like he might be mellowing out a little bit already, just in his tone towards the other GOP nominee or GOP candidates.
Yeah.
When Marco Rubio got out of the race, he had some sort of conciliatory statement for Marco Rubio, and that was the first time he'd shown any sort of softness during his campaign, I think.
Right.
Interestingly, I mean, so I don't really think that the big risk with a guy like Trump is foreign affairs. I think you're right. He's not a stupid guy. And I think, if people perceive the American president to be strong, there's less danger than if they perceive him to be weak.
Mm-hmm.
Because that just gives bad guys more freedom. Some of the bad players in the world. But where I see a danger is on the economic side.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stuff he's talking, we're going to slap a 45% tariff on everything coming from China. And so that was how the Great Depression actually really took off.
Wow.
There was this huge plunge in the stock market, which was grossly overvalued. There started to be some banking issues.
As it is right now, I would argue.
Well, who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to... well, anyway. So there turned out to be some banking issues, and then the response was to pass what was called the Smoot-Hawley Act, which basically slapped massive tariffs on imported goods, kind of destroyed foreign trade in all directions. So it was really kind of the catalyst for this global depression. And, that's the kind of thing that concerns me more, because he doesn't have any consistent economic principles at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I kind of view the loose cannon risk more being economic than political, actually.
So here's my question. And so for me, the big fear, or one reason why I'm so apolitical these days, is because of the massive amounts of debt we have and the deficits we run every year. So how serious is that? Am I being irrational here, or is that really a problem?
Well, one of the so what I would say is I think that if the federal debt as a ratio to the size of the economy never increased from where it was, could we handle that for the long term? I would say yes. The problem is that we and all the Western societies are growing older. Mm-hmm. We keep giving more and more to retirees. People keep living longer and longer. So there's this just explosion of cost associated with that, medical cost and, in our system, Social Security cost. And Social Security is due to run out of money in 7 years.
Yeah.
So, you have this, and what's happened with all the European economies is their debt ratios are far higher than ours and getting worse and worse as the birth rate continues to decline. Japan, their government debt is over twice the size of their economy.
Wow.
It's an unprecedented level.
Yeah.
So we're heading in that direction. The level we are right now isn't dangerous relative to other countries, but we're only years behind them, it seems, unless something changes the trajectory.
So practically speaking, when you say we're able to handle it, what does that mean practically? We're able to handle this massive debt.
What I would say is that it's kind of like your mortgage. What's your income, and how big a percentage of your income is your mortgage? Is it something you can handle while covering your other expenses? It's a calculation like that. It's what percentage of your income goes for debt service, and it's a number that we've managed for a while. Now the other thing is interest rates are artificially low too. If the federal government started to have to pay 5% instead of 2% on the 10-year bond, that's a chunk of money.
Right. But so where do deficits come into play? Because it seems like we have this debt, and we're continuing to build on that debt year after year. So my mortgage is going down every year. Mm-hmm. I'm paying it off, but it seems like we're racking up more and more debt as the deficits begin to accumulate. So, are we really handling it?
Well, during the second half of the Bush years and during the Obama years, the answer is no. I mean, one way that people gauge that is the deficit. How fast is the deficit increasing the existing debt? And if the size of your economy is growing faster than your accumulated debt is growing, then you're okay, because your ability to carry it is actually improving over time. But if the debt is increasing faster, as it's been for the last dozen years, then ultimately there's a day of reckoning. Ultimately, that process can't continue.
So
And I guess that's what I fear then, is that day of reckoning then.
So Jack Hoy becomes president. Like, what do you do with the economy right away?
Well, okay, like when I talked about there's some easy things to do. Like one of the things that just is hilarious to me is everybody's complaining about companies going overseas and their traders. It's like, what are they supposed to do?
Right.
Why are we looking at, like, why do they want to leave? Why is it such a bad environment here that nobody can afford to be an American company anymore? The answer is there's a bunch of things, but tax rates are a huge one. We have the highest tax rates in the developed world. And furthermore, if GE has a business in Germany and they earn a profit there, they pay German tax, okay? Just like a German company pays tax in the U.S. But if GE wants to take that money and invest it in a plant in the U.S., U.S. law says they have to pay tax again. We're the only country in the Western world who does that. Mm-hmm. So think about this. Let's say you had somebody looking to build a new gas turbine plant in South Carolina, and actually most of the gas turbines in the country are built in South Carolina. It would cost GE, if they were trying to repatriate money, it would cost them 50% more than it would cost their German competitor Siemens to do it, because we're punishing the American company.
Gee.
So stop doing that. And
So
then
what are we gaining from that?
nothing, because nobody's bringing their money back.
Right.
So even if you said, we don't want to go all that far, let's just have a tax holiday for 6 months. They actually did that about 10 years ago. So do you know how much money American companies have parked overseas right now? $2 trillion.
Wow.
So the irony is, and how much do they need for operations? Less than a fourth of that. So the irony is, when Obama did his stimulus X years ago, the $800 billion that didn't really have an effect, if he had just said, we're going to allow a 6-month tax holiday, and that money came back, you would have had $800 billion come back. It would have gone to productive investment, and the taxpayers wouldn't have had to spend a dime. Like, that's a really easy one.
Right.
And it's just waiting for somebody to do it. And we're not even talking about it. It's just
But an idea
so
like
easy.
that would be completely shot down by Democrats, right? I mean, that's anathema to them.
It's not fair.
Lowering taxes.
It's like, why is it fair to... Like, here's the irony to me. The Democrats are all about income inequality. And it's hard not to sympathize with that, although it's the way they measure it is stupid. But, to me, the issue is poverty. So if I've got a guy making $2 million a year and a guy making $20,000 a year, I can say, you know what, I'm going to raise taxes on that guy making $2 million. I'm going to take another $500,000 away. But if what that does is that knocks the guy making $20,000 a year, if that knocks him down by $1,000, you've dramatically improved income inequality, but you've made the poor guy poorer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's what we've been doing. Like, why is that good for the people that you're trying to help? It's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy because I hear stuff like this all the time, and I'm like, well, why isn't everybody just being smarter? Like, seriously.
See, I think ideology gets in the way. I think
right.
those ideas are brilliant, but that's going to be attached to a conservative trickle-down economics. The Democrats will scoff at that. They'll say it's ridiculous, it's unfair. There'll be gridlock in Congress. So much for that idea.
The public relations nightmare with it will never go anywhere.
It's just real. It's interesting because the whole thing about fairness is a tough one. We all think things should be fair, and yet fairness is kind of in the eyes of the beholder, first of all. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, you can't make things perfectly fair. No matter what solution you come up with, it's not going to be perfectly fair. So they argue that don't do that because it's unfair. It's like, why don't we look at what the real consequences are and see if it actually would help the people that we're trying to help?
Yeah.
It's just interesting how I think what you guys are touching on is like the terms of conversation have changed so much that you're not even talking about those things. And I think that's part of the appeal of a Donald Trump, is that he's willing to say the things that nobody else has felt like they were able to say. Mm-hmm. And
absolutely.
All right, so for normal guys like myself that wants to take care of my family and may have, not a huge extra amount of money to play around with, but some margin to figure out, like, what would be the best approach with what most people would call uncertainty with our future and the economy and all that stuff? Would you say keeping, hey, just keep the money in your own bank account and be way conservative? Would you guys encourage people to invest? So what should people do with margin at this point in our country's season of economic unrest and uncertainty?
Build an underground shelter and stock up on canned goods.
Says the conspirators.
Well, there's an old saying that you buy to the sound of cannons and sell to the sound of trumpets.
Yeah.
So when things are really dangerous, that's actually the best time to invest.
Yeah.
It's when everybody's feeling great about the market and everybody's talking about how well it's going that you really want to sell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but my thing too would be that doesn't mean that things can't collapse either. So I think that's why diversification is recommended and why it's wise. Because you know, kind of like the thing in Ecclesiastes where it says, you know, cast your bread upon the waters because you don't know what's going to work out, whether it's this or that or the other thing. And so I would say keep a cash margin, but also invest for the future.
Yeah.
And, you know, either way it happens, you'll be okay.
Right. Yeah. What about people aggressively going after paying off their mortgage as opposed to, hey, we can afford the mortgage payments, so let's just build up as much savings? Because it seems like if the economy were to crash, neither one of them would be worth anything. Paying off your mortgage because everybody's not going to be able to pay it off, and who cares? All the banks are just going to have to take it back over. But your savings isn't going to be worth much either because money's not going to be worth much. Do I just sound stupid, or are these valid things to bring up?
Not at all.
I think it's valid.
So what do y'all think?
I in a lot of ways, I'm with Jared. I would love to prepare by
Hunker down
by building a shelter and get some tangible, you know, resources stocked up that I could actually use as, you know, as value.
If you build that shelter, man, think about the Svensson Six, man. That'd be fun, dude. Spend the night parties.
I'm there. I'm there.
All right, let me ask some what I would call kind of crazy questions, but I have thought about before. Is there a chance that, obviously there's a chance, but how likely would it be at one tax season where everybody is expecting, I get a pretty sizable tax return, and federal government writes me and says, hey, you were due $6,000, as it came in through TurboTax, but we're holding on to this just because we're having to do some things, shift some things economically. Sorry, you're not going to ever see this money. What's the chances of something like that happening? And then even more radically, is there any way the country would ever, or the government would ever, go into people's bank accounts and just say, hey, we took 10% of everybody's money that they had in the bank?
That would be the beginning of the end.
That just happened in Greece, didn't it?
Yes.
So
so that would mark the beginning of economic collapse. I mean, if they're doing that, I mean, you would have people panicking. You'd have massive fear. You have widespread panic. So I think if that ever comes to that, we're doomed.
Yeah,
personally.
It's happened more than once.
It's happened more than once in America.
Oh yeah, not in America. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. But Greece. I mean, their economy collapsed. They're being bailed out by the EU.
But I think that's the point. Is that wouldn't be unthinkable if there was a collapse.
Yeah.
All kinds of crazy things can happen there.
I think the more disconcerting thing to think about in a scenario like that is that in our society, and I would like to know what you guys feel about this. In our society, I feel like we are so divided in the United States right now that I don't see how we can how individuals not take the government out of it. Individuals on different sides of the political spectrum can reconcile our opinions and beliefs to move forward in the event of a catastrophic economic collapse. Once looting and rioting starts or whatever the issue is, I guess what I'm talking about is more of an issue leading up to something like this.
Well, conspiratorial-minded me would say that is the impetus for one world government. You have a superpower like America collapsing, and so that would be an excuse for the behind-the-scenes powers to seize that power. We're relinquishing our power to be bailed out, and that would be how we get to that one world government.
Yeah. See, I just don't think anybody's that organized. And one of the reasons why there's always doom and gloom out there is that everybody's always the tendency, and economists do this all the time, of whatever the current trend is, they extrapolate it forever. And they say, if that happens, then we've got a problem. And it's like, well, yes, of course, but it never does. And, our systems have proven fairly adaptable over time. You muddle through.
People are resilient.
Yeah.
But get to the point of the division
Mm-hmm.
between people. I
agree with you.
Do you see that there's a way to reconcile your beliefs or my beliefs with somebody who is polar opposite?
Well, you know what? Ironically, I think yes, and by appealing to, and ironically, I think Barack Obama had a great opportunity to do that. I think he came into the presidency with great goodwill, and certainly was to the left of most of the population, and yet, could he have gone a different direction in terms of trying to bring people together? I think he could have. Obviously we'll never know, but again, to me, it's one of those things where could the right leader do it? Yes, I think so. Like again, a good example of that. Now here's one Winston Churchill. I mean, one of the things you got to realize about him was that he was a failure at the point where the war was getting ready to break out. He had been on the outs. He had been considered for the prime minister position, didn't get it, and was kind of like an object of ridicule for a lot of the British people. So they're in this desperate situation, and he was the only guy who had been up there kind of calling the Nazis for what they were. And, Britain should have surrendered, and they didn't, because he convinced them that they didn't have to, that they could make it. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, like I have this book that I've had for many, many years, and it's like the chapter that starts on, after the fall of France, and Britain was alone against the Nazis, and the Soviet Union was on the Nazi side at that point, and Japan.
Yeah.
They were all by themselves. And anyway, the chapter starts with this line. It says, "Remember him, for he saved all of you."
Yeah.
And the argument was, which is certainly a contestable argument, was that if Britain had succumbed, there's an excellent chance that no coalition could have been formed.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
Can one person make a difference?
Yeah.
I think so. But ironically, my kind of feeling is the division that you see in the American people, I really agree with Ted, and I think it's huge and it's enormously concerning. To me, it's the most concerning thing facing us.
Yeah, that's my number one fear right now. Because I look at my friends. I've grown up with friends who are just polar opposites from where I am, and it hurts me to not be able to discuss things rationally with anybody.
Yeah.
With very few people.
Yeah.
Well, you call them very belittling stuff, though.
I do need to tone down my.
I'm just. Hey, would anybody mind sharing who was y'all's front runner as far as from a preferential standpoint? You don't have to, but if anybody wants to, just yell it out.
I was a Ted Cruz guy.
Yeah.
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 Because he has a great name.
Yeah, our president is Ted Cruz. Yeah. All right.
I guess I kind of like Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
That's surprising to me.
Why is that?
Because you don't being so conspiratorial, I would think that you would see him as part of the establishment and part of the Bilderbergers and all the people up at the top of the cabal that are trying to take away our freedoms.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that you're right. Would I be rallying behind him? No, but I think I liked his personality. I thought he was pretty temperate. So yeah.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Sweet. All right, last question is, as the four of us on here are Christians, this is, I don't know, one of the most interesting questions for me to ponder. When you guys think of like all of the concerning things that we've talked about, all the way from nuclear war to the economy collapsing to what does it look like if America falls? I don't, not getting in depth with like genetic engineering and the advancement of technology and all that stuff from its own subject standpoint. But when you guys hear about all this sorts of stuff, do y'all start to think, could be possibly the end of the world, or do y'all think that's just ludicrous to pair those two together. I'll speak from me and Jared's standpoint, as we both tend to see the advancements in technology and creating human beings and all these things as maybe on the same level of Tower of Babel, where God came in and said, hey, these people are getting too smart. There's nothing that they can't do. We see it as almost the same sort of thing, like God would have to step in and stop science from doing that, just because of all the weird implications that seem, that we process it in that way. Or do you think, that doesn't make any sense? Things can just go on for hundreds of years. Doesn't really matter.
I'll advance the heretical proposition that I probably don't think that the Tower of Babel story is as literal as you do.
Right. No, I would actually agree, but I would say it's still, to me, it's still construing a message of God intervened to stop something.
Yeah.
Seems like it.
My feeling is, that at the end is when Christ returns. I don't think there will be any massive God interventions before that in terms of like that kind of a thing.
Right.
And are we close to that? What I would say is that not only don't I know, but that it's unknowable.
Yeah.
That lots of everybody's trying to figure that out, but I kind of look at Christ saying no one knows, including him, which is interesting. And so my feeling is it's like it's not even worthwhile to think about it because you're going to be wrong.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I would argue too there are some serious implications with the trajectory of technology. So I mean, from an ethical standpoint, from a moral standpoint, if there's no impending end of the world, our world's going to be radically changed in 25 years. We want to be able to recognize it. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'm very conflicted about this. I want to agree with you, Jared, and Joey, but at the same time,
I don't want to agree with me.
Well, I think it's pretty scary.
Like I want to kind of like.
I would like to be able to put some sort of concrete knowledge, or not knowledge, but thought to, oh yes, I see this happening and I can tie it to X, Y, and Z. But I don't think that the return of Christ is predicated on anything that we do here on earth. I think it is totally decoupled from that. It's in his time.
But if you buy into the idea that Satan is the ruler of this world, then I would argue that these powers behind the scene are in league with Satan, at war with God.
I agree.
So it's not just purely humans running amok. There's also satanic influences. That's where my whole conspiracy mind is rooted in, is that whole like satanic conspiracy against God, Creator God.
So Jared, my difference in perspective on that. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said there, but I think that one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to look at what's really significant in God's eyes through the eyes of the world. And what's significant in the eyes of the world is who's in charge, who's the superpower, who's, if it comes down to these two nations fighting, who's going to win. And to me, it's more a matter of the advance of the gospel. So is China a fearsome economic competitor? Could they be a fearsome military competitor? And are they striving to be? Yes. To me, the more important fact about China is that the largest church in the world is in China right now. It's growing despite oppression. And, that's like that to me is at the center of God's ultimate purpose. So how that plays out politically, I don't know. But I kind of think that whatever the end times come, it's going to be more a function of the church than it is of politics.
Gotcha. Word up. All right. Well, we think we're going to wrap it up about right there. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add before?
I've been enjoying watching Jared on the screen. I feel like I'm in an episode of The X-Files, and he's one of the hackers.
Because of the dark background?
Yeah, dark background and conspiratorial, and he's really animated.
Yeah, I would say with the end of the world stuff, and I hate admitting this, but I feel like I shouldn't do this, but I feel here I am approaching 40, and like I am not bothered by getting older. I actually look forward to the latter years and seeing grandkids and all that stuff. And I almost feel like my pessimism robs me of the joy of being like, oh, there's going to be a day where like my kids bring over their kids and I get to just kind of hang out with them. And, you know, I was responsible with my finances and I can be generous and at the same time just sigh of relief and still do good things in life. But not, you know what I'm saying? Like I almost feel like I don't see that as possible because either we're going to be living in like some sort of a crazy chaotic world or we'll be in heaven.
Yeah, but the counter for that to me is regardless, I have peace in knowing that God's in control.
Yeah.
So to me, there's some scary propositions out there, but ultimately God's going to win. Like he's going to triumph all. So that gives me peace. So I hear where you're coming from, but you know, if and when these things start to happen, that's going to validate, you know, what I believe anyway. But number two, I know God's going to win out, and I know that I'll spend eternity in heaven with Him. So, you know, it's kind of exciting, I think, but at the same time scary. I see where you're coming from too.
All right. Well, hey, let's get a movement started. When you go in November to vote, just go ahead and do the write-in option or type in, but write your own candidate, and we're just going to start writing in Jack Hoy. And so in 2020, we'll have more people doing that, and at some point, it's going to be a name where people are hearing, and they're going to have to listen.
I think Jack Hoy is going to be up at the brokered Republican convention.
We're going to out-Trump Trump.
That's right, folks. You've been listening to the Pastor with No Answers. We want to thank you for listening. PastorWithNoAnswers.com. That's kind of the channel in which you can go visit other stuff like Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Also, I just want to let you know, there's a Pastor with No Answers discussion group out there on Facebook that I didn't even start, and that's cool. That's cool. Oh, man, it's really cool because nobody expects me to go on there and chime in. But, hey, sometimes I'm watching. All right, so next week, kind of a cool thing. One of you wrote us, a guy named Adrian. Situation at his church, didn't feel like he was getting paid enough. He had knowledge of what other people were getting paid, and he was just like, hey, man, I got to get paid more, man. I got to put food on the table for crying out loud. Anyway, we thought it was compelling of enough thing that he was bringing up to bring him on and talk to a COO of a mega church. So it's a pretty cool discussion on church as a business, church as a money-making machine, church as a ministry, and church as a means for making a living for some people like yours truly. Join us next week. In the meantime, have a good weekend. Have a good week whenever you are listening to this, and we will see ya.